Hello, everyone. Jeannine Shao from Kargo. At Kargo, we like to say that we put the art in ad tech, so I am thrilled to be here with my new friend who I just met, Michelle Peluso, and she is a transformative leader. And I'll tell you that when we spoke on the phone, she's going to talk about her leadership philosophy, but she has really done it all. She's now running a giant retailer and health company. All right, so I was just going on about Michelle, and I just want to say she's a badass. She is a transformative leader. She's worked in pretty much every sector, with tech being the through line, from travel to tech, IBM, to banking, to fashion, and now running the most huge health and retailer, reaching over 100 million consumers, correct? And you are really responsible for the consumer experience. And I'll say, we were talking a lot about leadership and what's important to the customer, and I learned so much from your leadership philosophy. And, we talked earlier about curiosity being a very important part of being successful. And I loved your saying, be a learn-it-all, not a know-it-all.
Satya Nadella's saying, actually, but yes, I love it.
But I love that saying, and also lean in with joy or play with joy. So there's so many great things that you have to talk to us about, and I'm excited about that. I will say, I had to write this down because I have to brag a little bit about. Here's some of the noteworthy accomplishments that Michelle has had. Woman of Power and Influence by the National Organization of Women, Most Creative People by Fast Company, the world's most influential CMOs by Forbes, and the CMO Hall of Fame. So she is a badass. So it's a honor and a privilege to be sitting with you. So now, at CVS, you say your healthier happens together, which I love that saying. I want to hear a little bit about your marketing philosophy and at CVS and how you're paving the way to success for 2024.
All right, good. Well, so great to be here, and thanks for coming out in the snow and ice and storm. And I'm going to tell my kids, my teenagers, that you think I'm a badass. It's going to go down
you're a badass.
Really well at dinner tonight.
Well, and plus,
I'm like, do your homework. I'm a badass.
I should mention she's also been on the board of Nike for 9 years and a real sneakerhead. So she is truly like the coolest of cool.
It's a fascinating time because healthcare is changing. And if I think about our marketing philosophy or consumer philosophy, and I've done a few things at CVS. I've run digital, I've run the stores, and now I'm kind of doing operations and consumer experience marketing across Aetna, Caremark, and CVS.
And all in 3 years. That's a lot.
I know. But I think there's three things we really have to do. First of all, healthcare traditionally has put the provider at the center, and what Karen, our CEO, is asking is, how do we change that and put consumers more at the center? They're more informed, they're more empowered. So that's one of the biggest focuses we have. We can talk about that. Second one is, how does omni-channel really change, and technology change the way we define convenience and access to care. There's so many healthcare crises happening in this country, and so how do we use technology in new ways to redefine the care models, redefine access and convenience? And last but not least, how do we really anchor on a path to growth? So there's new technology, new innovation, new capabilities enabling us from a marketing perspective to grow in unique ways. So those are the three things we're super focused on.
That's great. And you talk in your leadership philosophy a lot about the North Star and you putting the consumer as your North Star. Can you talk a little bit about that? And,
Yeah, one of the privileges I've had of being in different industries is seeing how industries go about consumer transformation. And if you think about it, it's often intertwined with technology. People get access to more information, more technology. They start to expect something different from all of their experiences, not just the experience they have in one particular industry. So I was lucky to be at the forefront of that at Travelocity. I was CEO of Travelocity at the beginning and kind of saw the rise of how technology was reshaping the consumer experience. And if you think think about it, before that, we would call the airlines or even things like travel agents, and people would sit, and the control was really the agent who could tell you, which flights, what cost. And when travel started to digitize and Travelocity and others came on the forefront, it changed the relationship that consumers had to put them in the driver's seat of travel. That same thing started to happen with banking. Post the financial crisis, the huge proliferation of innovation in the way people could bank, even basic things like mobile check deposit. You don't have to go to the bank. The bank is sort of at your kitchen table. So again, digital banking revolutionized the relationship consumers had with banking. Fashion, I was CEO of Gilt. We saw the same thing happening with fashion when, all of a sudden people were willing to take more risk and bring kind of fashion to their lives in a new way. And the same is starting to happen with healthcare. It is a slow process. Obviously, it's a highly regulated industry. It's a highly complicated industry. But if you think about your own personal healthcare experience, or think about someone who's been through a tough healthcare experience that you love, it is not centered on, as much as we say it is, it really isn't centered on the patient. It's hard to get appointments. It's complicated. Information is really cumbersome, especially at a time when you often feel vulnerable. You can't get access to care in many parts of this country. We have a mental health crisis, and yet in many parts of this country, we don't have nearly enough kind of therapists and mental health providers. Same is true for women's reproductive rights. We don't have enough OBGYNs in many parts of this country. So if you think about the way the healthcare model has been, created, it is really created and centered on the provider experience. And so Karen, our CEO, has a fundamental belief and philosophy that, we can change that. Our differentiator, Jeannine, we have 10,000 community locations. We have 10,000 stores. 10,000 stores.
That's huge.
200,000 people in our communities every day. Those are our CVS pharmacies, where the average person goes 7 times the most frequent transaction in healthcare. So you're there. We have minute clinics, health hubs. And so the question for us is, how do we change that model and make sure that we're truly grounding and use technology in new ways and omni-channel to ground in the consumer experience and differentiate?
That's great, and that's huge. That's a big task. And I've listened to you speak, and you talked a lot about measurement and how you can't make progress unless you measure something. And I like to say you have to treasure what you measure, right? So can you talk a little about measurement and KPIs and what success looks like in that way?
Sure, and I think you have to. I think it's fundamentally important, but I think it's also critical. So one of the mistakes I think a lot of marketers make is we use metrics and measurements that don't matter to our boards, don't matter to our CEOs, don't matter to our investors. And so sometimes you hear people talk about, well, we did this and it got this many impressions or this many clicks or even this many sort of, or even like return on, ad spend, ROAS, et cetera. That is not something you will ever hear a CEO say to a shareholder or to a board of directors. And so I think the first thing we have to do from a marketing perspective is make sure we're grounding ourselves in the language that operators use with the board. And I've had the privilege of most of my career actually being in operating jobs. And so that's the first thing, really making sure you understand the business strategy, really making sure you understand how you translate marketing's impact and results into the language the CEO, the operator, the presidents, the board, the shareholders speak is important.
Being aligned.
Being aligned is really important. So with my marketers, I always say, of course, you want to understand what the impact of marketing is, but we have to sign up for the bigger revenue goals and growth goals of the company. That's really important to us. When we're thinking about things like consumer centricity, we measure by Net Promoter Score. So we this year will have last year had 17.5 million pieces of Net Promoter feedback from consumers all across this country, more than 100 million consumers we serve, and that spans Aetna, Caremark, and CVS. And what's great about that is we're measuring the moments that matter systemically across the healthcare journey, whether you're disputing a prior authorization or paying for something or shopping for vitamins in the front store, picking up a pharmacy prescription, getting healthcare delivered, sophisticated healthcare delivered. And that enables us to do a few things. One, we're one of the only companies in the country that closes the loop when we see detractor notes, especially in some of our more important high-touch businesses. We call back and make sure we're making it right with the consumer. Secondly, we have pervasive kind of business forums across the company where we're acting on this feedback. Third, we have a company-wide training program helping with heart across 300,000 people to infuse a culture of consumer centricity. But here's the thing I like to say, even though we measure NPS, a lot of correlation between NPS for us and lower attrition, higher lifetime value, all the good business metrics. One thing I think we often forget when we're sort of thinking about NPS, we can spend a lot of time figuring out how to solve detractors, those people who give us a 0 through 6, they're not happy, they're not satisfied. You also have to spend time really understanding what creates delight and what creates promoters and amplifying and scaling those things that create, delight. So for instance, and it's so intuitive once you sort of look at the data, but maybe not something you would think about before that. If somebody says we gave them a warm, personalized greeting when they walk in the store, if we do something small like hand a sticker to a child who's getting a shot and is scared, if we slip a Mother's Day card into a bag, I was in a store the other day during the holidays where they hide the elf on the shelf, and kids come in and look for the elf on the shelf and kind of get a little sticker or something if they find it. Those moments when we know someone's pregnant for the first time in our Aetna business, they call us, we'll handwrite a note to them to congratulate them on the journey and make sure they know we'll be here if they need help. Those things go an enormous way in humanizing our very big, complicated company and creating kind of brand love. So that's another thing we measure. And then, of course, we're super, super passionate about the digital experience, the omnichannel experience. So moving more consumers to more engaged digital users is important as well.
That's great. So I think I've also heard you say in a number of talks that I saw online about tech and humanization. So that is key. So I love that. And that warms my heart to hear that that's happening in store.
Well, that is super important, right? Because I think sometimes we can all get, again, you're trying to fix the problems, you're trying to solve the detractors, that's important. Secondly, you're thinking about technology, but if you're not really, at least for us, 10,000 locations, that's an extraordinary thing. I mean, we're on the ground when a tornado hits in a community. We're the ones that, they come to make sure their prescriptions and all the rest of it. So truly being community-centered, truly being human in the community, we see time and time again in studies that one of the reasons people love CVS is when they walk in, they have a personal experience. It's not a big box. They often run into a friend. It's just, the pharmacist they've trusted for the past 5 years. So those ways, giving our team the time to amplify those moments with consumers is important.
That's great. And I do. I have a CVS on the corner of where I live on the Upper West Side, and I have that experience. The people are amazing. So speaking of experience and what matters most to shoppers today, we talked a little bit about like personalization and whatnot. How is convenience everything? How do you balance all this? Yeah. And how do you make like a great experience? I mean, like, is everyone given a playbook? I mean, tell me about how you make that human side come out with the efficiency.
So we have a program called Helping with Heart, which we designed with Disney, actually. We did a lot of benchmarking about like who does this best in the world. And we have put now almost 300,000 people through Helping with Heart training, which was the sort of co-designed program with Disney.
300,000? Mm-hmm. Wow. Mm-hmm.
And now it's embedded in onboarding and rewards, et cetera. But the point of Helping with Heart is it's simple 6 service actions that we ask, not just, by the way, our frontline colleagues, but even for those of us that are in corporate to be thinking about to enable our colleagues to provide great service. So it's things like I provide a warm and personalized greeting. That's the first one. We know that when someone walks into a store or somebody calls our call center or somebody is engaging with us in some way, that warm, not just welcome to CVS, but even more personalized. I'm Michelle. Welcome to CVS. At any point today, if you need anything, make sure to call out and I'll come find you and help you get what you need. Or are you here looking? You said you're looking for vitamins. Let me walk you over to the vitamin section. If you're calling, taking the time to give a couple facts about yourself to warm up that experience. That's one of them. So there are 6 service actions that all employees are trained on. And you could say, well, that's a frontline thing. But think about it. We send out, this is an embarrassing number, but I think we send out something like 2 billion texts a year, which we've really got to improve. Yeah, I know. You really have to get better at.
Wow. I thought my teenager
forgive me. Exactly. Yeah. But that, that's a great question. Is it warm and personalized? It's not the front line doing that. It's us in corporate who are designing these crazy emails sometimes that honestly make no sense. I got one the other day from my team and it basically said, I'm an Aetna member, of course, and I've been an Aetna member for a long time. I get but this email was so generic and it was like, if you're if you're a Molina Health, click here. If you're Aetna Better Care, click here. If you're Aetna PPO, click here. It was a terrible message. We know a lot more about me. That was not a warm, personalized greeting. So the service actions and the language we use with our team is not just meant for the front line. It's meant for all of us. One of them is I remove obstacles. Now you can talk about that in the front line. Example yesterday of I was in a store, the pharmacy wasn't open. A woman came in, she had a child, they needed the medicine quickly. Pharmacy wasn't open. The store manager said, let me take your name and number. The second the pharmacist walks in, I'm going to give it to her so she can call you and let you know when the medicine's ready. That is removing an obstacle. That's not just saying, sorry, pharmacy's closed. But we have to do that at corporate too. I mean, how many times do we design, we think about our channel. Well, I own the email channel, or I own the sort of demand gen channel, or I own search, or I own retargeting and display, or, are we really thinking about that holistic experience? Those are really important questions.
That's great. Well, 2 billion texts?
Yeah.
That's crazy. And personalizing them all. That's wonderful. Now, speaking of which, your tactics about personalizing experiences, we're talking about that, on-site, in-store, and your advertising and marketing. I mean, that's a big task.
Yeah.
I mean, how are you managing personalization across everything? I mean, with 100 million
That's
consumers.
Right. Yeah, and 50, 60 million active digital consumers every month. And so it's not easy, obviously. But I think that the important thing is to think about it almost like in a T-shape. So when we take a program, I'll talk about Here for Her, which is a program really Here for Her, which is a program really aimed towards the things we do to support women in their health journey. And that is a holistic across the company approach. So that's about services we provide, but it's also about some really concrete things. We've taken the pink tax off of every single product. We're the only retailer in the country that does not believe in the pink tax, right? Women pay on average $1,300 more than men for the same exact product, but because it's pink, not blue. And so, we've removed that across all of our stores. We, believe it or not, in 20 states, the only thing in our stores that have a tax are period products. And so we've removed that tax. We pay the tax in the 22 states that still charge luxury tax, for the record, luxury tax on period products. And we've introduced a bunch of new services. We're at the forefront now of introducing, pretty soon now, over-the-counter birth control pills, which is the FDA approved. That's an example of a program that runs holistically, and we have to think about who are the right audiences, how are we telling that message, and how is it showing up in store, online, when they're searching for us, et cetera. So that's what I mean when you look horizontally. Take a program like that and make sure every single touch point for the right audience in the right way is telling the story. But then secondly, we have to think about the consumer himself or herself. And while, as you would expect, there's a huge amount of regulation on what data can be shared across the company, whether it's Aetna or Caremark or the pharmacy or the front store, we work really hard. We have 75 million extra care members. So that's first-party data on 75 million Americans.
75 million.
Yeah, in this country, right? This country alone. And so we have some really tailored ways to think about using that data to benefit the consumer's healthcare journey and advertisers. We have a big, robust advertising business with our supplier partners, where they can actually make sure they're really targeting the right message to the right customer and seeing the results they want. So we're really thoughtful about it, but those journeys are important. The last thing I would say is obviously the marketing tech stack is fundamentally important. And so we've spent a lot of time making sure we're, organized and implementing technology in a way that makes sense, but also that people are trained, because if we haven't changed process, we haven't changed training, technology won't make a difference.
Do you ever sleep? I mean, that's
yeah.
So anyway, as far as some of the approaches to drive growth. I mean, that in the end, we all get that's a big evaluation for all of us. So what's exciting about 2024 in that aspect?
Yeah, and I'm sure there's going to be so much conversation about AI as always. But I would say, it's a really interesting time to think about how technology is reshaping our craft. And I think more broadly, obviously, all sorts of parts of our businesses. And I'll give you a few examples. Number one of our most important principles is we think about how technology can augment the human experience and augment our colleague experience. That's really important. And so, for instance, we're using Gen AI to generate new forms of content. We obviously are a massive content producer, as you can imagine, with 50 million, active digital users every month. But we still run that through our editing process, our review process, our legal process. But it takes the art of writing content, and vastly simplifies it down from like 8 weeks down to hours, honestly. And then we still kind of go through the right approvals. We're using AI in our call centers for call summarization. When our agents listen on calls, and by the way, we have, as you can imagine, hundreds of millions of calls across the company every year. Right now, our agents are taking notes in CRM. They're summarizing their call notes as agents do. After the fact, AI now summarizes for them, so they can actually actively listen on the call, and then they can actually just take the time to review that. We're thinking about how AI is changing the claims process. How can it be used to speed up claims? How can it be used to speed up prior authorization? Can we make predictions on which doctors don't require prior authorizations or which procedures don't require prior authorization, so we can simplify the consumer experience. So I actually think there's some really concrete use cases that we're implementing that are exciting. We've seen this even with clinicians. One of the biggest complaints patients have with clinicians is it's, a 5-minute visit, 10-minute visit, doctor's sitting there on the side taking notes while they're going, and the patient doesn't really always feel heard. Well, again, in the clinical setting now, AI can actually summarize what the patient-doctor experiences, so the doctor can be fully focused on the patient. So lots of places that I think, some of this new capability, but of course it comes with, the requirement for really strong data governance, really strong kind of privacy governance, and frankly, just making sure that we're not introducing in any way bias into the models as well.
That's great, but it's all new and it's a lot.
Yeah.
So it's exciting, and speaking of which, what creative innovations are you really excited about?
Yeah. And let me just say one quick thing, Jeannine, you started with this. There's that Satya Nadella quote, which I've always loved, which is be a learn-it-all, not a know-it-all. If there was ever a time for all of us to kind of be learn-it-alls, it really truly is now.
Oh, yeah.
Because even when we
territory.
do implement something, we're always having to figure out, like, is this working? What's not working about it? How do we make it better? And so this idea of like constant learning and setting aside the time on your calendar each week, literally blocking the time. We have Focus Fridays where Friday afternoons we don't allow meetings. And that is to give back to our marketers time to actually do training, engagement, to be thinking. We have a program called Altitude, which is both class-based and self-paced training. So we block all Friday afternoons so that you can take the time to kind of learn more about your craft and how it's changing.
That is great. I love that. Altitude. Yeah. So how is that translating to creative innovations and, what you're doing in that space? Because, you're taking all this time to learn and taking all this knowledge, and what's the creative output?
Well, look, there's a ton of ways. We all know this creative is being remade by Gen AI too. But I actually, matter of fact, I was in a studio the other day where it was incredible. This is a true sort of virtual reality production studio. And so instead of sending, we're doing some commercials on Healthier Happens Together, instead of sending people off site to, as we would normally do filming and production, it's all done in this virtual studio. The backdrop is changing all the time, and it looks incredibly real. It looks like somebody is in a CVS pharmacy or at a home, discussing with their family over the dinner table. It's actually kind of frightening. So I do think there are lots of ways that the creative process is changing, but I will still fundamentally believe nothing beats a big, bold idea. Nothing beats a big, bold experiential idea. And so we think about something like Cure for Her. That's not a campaign. That is action, right? That's right. Grounded in investments we're making, actions we're taking to be an advocate for women's health. Then we can think about how to explore that creatively, and we have a lot of fun with it, et cetera. And we're using lots of influencers and all sorts of, every part of the media mix. But it has to be anchored in a big, bold experiential idea.
That's great. And before we open it up for questions, I do have to throw in an extra question about, you talk about leading with joy, and you talk a lot about delighting the consumer. And I want to hear about your personal philosophy and CVS Health philosophy around that.
Yeah. Well, I think, over my career, right, like I've sort of learned the lesson that when things are bad, they're never really as bad as you think. And when things are good, they're never really as good as you think. And so, I just think it's fundamentally important to play with joy. I'm a big sports fan, and obviously being on Nike for so long, I've gotten to see up close and personal some extraordinary athletes. And my fundamental belief is those athletes that, of course, have incredible talent and work really hard, that's foundational. But those that love their craft, those that love what they do, those that that walk onto the court every single time and play with joy, those are the athletes that have, incredible longevity in their careers and build others up. There was a great article, I think it was yesterday in the New York Times about, and I'm blanking on her name, I should know. She's the winningest college basketball female coach, Stanford. Anybody know her name? It will just be Coach K here very soon with lifetime wins. And no one's ever heard of her. See, there's the thing, right? You've all heard of Duke's Coach K. So she was extraordinary, and she does this, with Stanford without a lot of the things that other universities can do. But when you read about her and you read about kind of her philosophy, it's fascinating. She fundamentally believes that every single member of her team, needs something different. She fundamentally believes that the team has to have shared values and operate,
That's
as one.
personalization,
Right. But she believes they have to operate as one and have shared values and be in it for the team. And she loves the game. She loves the game. She loves coaching. She loves the game. So every time, win or lose, she is playing with joy. And I think there's something, when you can do that and the lightness that gives you yourself to kind of, when you have a really bad day and you didn't leave it all on the court, or you didn't leave it all on the field, that grace to kind of pick yourself back up and play with joy the next day, I think it elevates everybody around you.
I love that philosophy. I'll follow you anywhere. I love that's great. Anyway, want to open it up for questions. I mean, CVS Health is transforming the world in this very transformative time, and so want to hear if anyone has any questions.
Yes, here we go. Can you tell us who you are first?
Hi, my name is Adrienne Ross. I work with Jeannine at Kargo. So nice to be with you today, Michelle. COVID was challenging for us all over the last couple of years, but I'm just curious if you have one or two takeaways in relation to what you learned about accessibility, whether that be like a deeper investment in your scheduling system or, your chatbots or, the education that consumers are getting in store about health and wellness products.
Great question. Well, I think we're still realizing the impact of the pandemic. I think we still don't fully appreciate. But one thing I spent a lot of time thinking about is actually mental health and well-being of, certainly America. When you look at the rise in diagnosed mental health conditions in this country, it is staggering. And it's particularly staggering for young women 13 to kind of 29 years old, where 45 or so percent report having significant mental health and behavioral health challenges.
45%.
Yeah. And that number, by the way, was like 14, 15%. And some of this is, of course, there's people are more willing to talk about it. There's less stigma, so that's wonderful. But there's no doubt that part of this is just the isolation of, the pandemic and social media and. And so one of the most important things we need to do as leaders and we need to do with our consumers as marketers is constantly be thinking about how do we create community? How do we amplify and community even within our work? So there's a lot of debate about hybrid work, not hybrid work, come to the office, don't come to the office. I won't wade into that here. But I will say that I think being way more intentional about how we're spending time in person with our teams is really critical, because I think we have lost some of that, mentoring, some of that conversation, some of that just humanity. And so we've been intentional about that. With respect to healthcare, the pandemic introduced some incredible innovation and some serious issues. One of the most incredible innovations was, of course, access to virtual care. And for something like mental health, where there is stigma and there aren't enough practitioners around the country, matter of fact, 1 in 3 Americans do not have access to mental health providers within a 20-mile radius of their community.
1 in 3.
1 in 3.
That's high.
Yeah. So things like virtual health can really be in concert with, in person, can be a lifesaver, can be a game changer. So we certainly want to lean into that. But But healthcare is local. It does, I don't think it'll ever be the case that, virtual makes the most sense. But I do think it's one of the reasons that, Karen, our CEO, has been so passionate about if the consumer's at the center, then you start to think about what does she need at home? What does she need in clinic? What does she need, with the pharmacy? What does she need virtually? How do we architect a set of capabilities and channels that really work for her and that don't feel like independent silos? That's a great question, though.
That's great.
Hi, one wonderful panel. Scott Furniss with Epsilon. So first of all, I'm a member of the CVS Care Mart.
Thank you.
I used to be.
You get points.
I get
That's
points.
good.
And I get a lot of those text messages. But you know what? What I love about them is they're all relevant ones. I actually look forward to my CVS text messages because
we have plenty that aren't yet quite
no,
relevant. So that's
and the
clear.
reason I say that is like I used to, I live in Atlanta. I used to go to Walgreens, the other guy, some, but then I switched over, and my experience of personalization has been really good. So
That's great.
whether I'm on, I might have a medicine that I take regularly. Well, if it's about to go out, I get a reminder, hey, don't forget you need to fill this. Or then I think you're doing a good job of cross-channel too. When I say
Right.
cross-channel, it means not just the pharmacy, but what other things within your store could I leverage and use? So I think
Great.
there's
Thank you.
great opportunities to do more with that. So my question for you is, you've covered a lot. Third-party cookies going away.
Yeah.
Big deal, right? And because that's a way.
Sure.
Do you guys feel like you're prepared for that? Because I run into a lot of retailers that are like, it finally hit them, and they're like, it was like year 2000.
Right.
A lot of y'all don't remember that.
Yeah.
But we were all concerned that the internet was going to just implode, and
Yeah.
we were all going to be living in the caveman world again. So do you feel like you're prepared for it, and are your partners
great
prepared
question.
for it?
I mean, look, this is one of so love extra care, hate extra care, love the couponing at CVS, hate the couponing, the yellow tags. What it did provide and has provided is tremendous amount of first party data on 75 million Americans. And so, having that kind of rich, engaged loyalty program created an advantage in terms of data and insight that very, very few retailers in this country have. And so when you think about the deprecation of cookies, it puts us in a bit of a competitively different position because of that sort of treasure chest of information. And we leverage it in two ways. One, of course, is, as I mentioned, directly in terms of how we think about marketing and personalization with our consumers. But secondly, we have our CMX, or our CVS Media Exchange business, where advertisers can leverage that information and do much more targeted messaging. That works for us too, because the last thing we want is to bombard consumers with supplier advertiser messaging that isn't relevant to them. So, maybe an advertiser will come to us, maybe it's, L'Oreal, and say, look, we have this new skincare line that's really meant for women of this age who have bought these kind of products in the past. That gives us the ability, both in store, on shelf, and in our email channels, to connect with the relevant audience and off us, right? So we retarget on their behalf as well. So I think that first party data advantage we have is a significant one, but it requires constant, careful, cultivating.
Yeah, makes sense. And for people that don't know, that's the retail media network.
Yes, that's right. Yes, thank you. Thanks for the translation and for the customer.
Yeah.
Yes.
Muriel? Sure.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Muriel Gonzalez from the Vitamin Shop.
He's also a badass.
Yeah, exactly.
Walmart recently talked about the impact on their business of the weight loss drugs.
Yeah.
And they were able to track certain customers who are actually buying less food. Do you see have you been able to see any changes in your business as a result?
Yeah, so the whole category of GLP-1s has been fascinating, right? And massive innovation, and we're still learning about all the potential benefits of this new class of drugs. Having said that, if everybody today who was overweight and wanted to use GLP-1s as weight management, that would cost annually $1 trillion to the U.S. economy.
$1 trillion?
$1 trillion, because these are extremely expensive medications. And they're lifetime medications, by the way. These are not medications you take for a month or two and you've kind of lost the weight and you go back. What the studies have said is that you really need to keep the benefits. You need to be on these drugs sort of permanently. So we have a huge role to play at CVS Health, and this is where sort of our PBM part of the business comes into play, to help negotiate and push for price discounts and alternative treatments and therapies. So we're kind of really engaged and involved with the manufacturers and with government to say, how do we take what is an extraordinary innovation? There's no doubt. How do we think about wrapping that with the right care management routines and programs for our patients? And how do we think ultimately about, societal cost and how we can afford this medication, right? $1 trillion is not affordable. So those are the kind of things that we advocate for. To your point about consumer behavior, I'm not sure our grocery business is big enough. We certainly have one, but to really see the implications of that. But we have been, as we position ourselves more and more as a healthcare company, of course, the first to eliminate tobacco from our stores. We have been working hard to reposition a lot of our sort of food lines to be healthier, which we're excited about. Great question.
That's good.
Hi, Lauren Chesley, SiriusXM. So I work for an audio company, and
Very fun.
we talk about brand marketing and consumer experiences and senses and activating all of those. I'm curious how you're thinking about sound in particular for the future and any other senses that you're tapping into outside of sight.
Oh, great question, and very cool question, actually. I think it's a great question because, we so often anchor on the visual in our craft. And so, we've been doing things like, for instance, we've been thinking about, how does music, we're introducing a new creative campaign here in a couple of weeks. Healthier Happens Together is kind of our second version of this. We have Jennifer Hudson recording. It's all sung, actually. The entire campaign is sung. Jennifer Hudson, I think, is recording it as we speak, which is great. And that's kind of an interesting way for us to think about, how does sound, how does voice, how do we introduce things? How do we introduce that in our store? What kind of music are we using in our store? What kind of mood are we trying to create in our stores? How do we let our communities tailor that? We have stores that are predominantly, our Navarro stores are predominantly for the Cuban American consumer. Our EMA stores predominantly for Hispanic American consumers. We think about sound and music in those stores really differently as well. So I love the question. I probably need to think about it more too. Yeah, I'm sure.
We got time for one last question. Anybody? All right.
I know there's someone.
Okay, one last one back here. All right, Mike.
Hey, what's going on? My name is Mike. I'm from FIFO. We are ratings and reviews. Do you look at reviews as part of a customer experience or more of a way to placate unhappy customers?
Yeah. I don't know that we're sophisticated enough, honestly, in thinking about all that. We've had some great conversations. We have started to, and I actually think about this particularly with respect to some of our healthcare delivery assets. Like, for instance, if you think about the way you do a provider search for a doctor today, you often go online and look for reviews. You look and see what does it say about the doctor, how do they treat people. When we advertise things like our Minute Clinic and our health hubs, we talk more about the facility. Like, this is Minute Clinic. These are the services. And so we've been having some conversations recently about, again, how do we put ourselves back in the mind of the consumer and think differently about how reviews can shape your willingness to try healthcare delivery in a new way. So I think we have a lot more thinking to do about it. I think we play the game in the traditional way with like our front store products, both online, products are reviewed, obviously, and we show up in searches all the time. I think I think we're starting to think in a more sophisticated way about what is reviews and what does consumer's voice mean in healthcare delivery. So it's a new area for us. I'm sure you've got some great thoughts and ideas. Great.
All right, I love it. Thank you so much. I think we are just about out of time.
All right, big thank you to Jeannine.
Yes,
Awesome.
thank you.
Thank you.
It's what we had a bunch of great questions, not a single one about the receipts, which I thought was, I was curious about it.
Well, we streamlined receipts by 2/3, and sadly, that paper in the 2 years time we've done it, will have the paper we've saved will have wrapped around the globe like 4 times. So we have made a difference.
I love it. I love
more
it.
to come.
It's because again, it's kind of like the Starbucks, writing your name wrong on the cup on purpose. Is it some sort of secret marketing
there's
campaign?
wedding dresses.
Right, exactly. But I think the sustainability side is way more important. And look, we just came back from CES. We talked about healthcare and the health and wellness space in general just exploding. Every brand wants to be a health and wellness brand. Beauty brands are not selling cosmetics. They're selling personal care, right? You're not selling drinks or snacks. You're selling functional beverages, right? So to be in this space must be really exciting. Like, do you see that trend continuing?
Absolutely. And it's a great excuse too, by the way, like when I'm eating candy at night from CVS, I'm like, this is mental health and well-being,
Absolutely.
So it works really well with the kids.
Chocolate is all about the mental health.
Absolutely.
I'm with you.
Sure. Exactly.
One more big round of applause
Thanks,
for our
everyone.
group. Thank you very, very much.